Hello to everyone and no one. I'm talking at you in English because it's the only language that quote-unquote matters, and because a big chunk of my thinking has been formed through content in that language, meaning that I'm still struggling to integrate the thoughts that come to me more naturally in it with my mother tongue and other tongues. What the fuck? I'm still trying to answer that question. No, seriously, what the hell is this shit? To put it in a format more academically accessible, meaning in as many words that no one's gonna hear, let alone respond to, the subject of our current obsession seems to be no subject at all, and at the same time the totality of all subjects, given how every phenomenon which we encounter is relational with the whole and functions as a holon, leaving us with no clear function and a constant return to the self-reflective, never-ending reorientation of our entire life trajectories, which are pulled at the same time from the direction of tradition, familial expectations, and societal functions as the substance of our existential needs, which are being pulled by our intrinsic needs for fulfillment, self-actualization, purposefulness, derived from actual contribution to our community, however nebulous we define it, and answering the question that underlie our direct processes and decision processes, the importance of which is often disregarded and to which answers are mostly implied, which are nonetheless increasingly questioned from many corners of our postmodern or ever-emergently meta-modern society, among which are questions that are the things which are going to regret before we die. What happens after death? Is any course of action going to lead to lasting results? How do we want to be remembered? What is our highest calling? What are our common interests? What is the extent of our freedom? Is a stable sense of satisfaction accessible within our lifetimes? How do we prepare for the future we can't even define? Among a plethora of other questions which remain inarticulated due to our limited understanding of the very language we use and the signified under which are very imprecise signifiers, thus making the pursuit of our answers inextricably tied to our inability to have concrete ground from which to approach them, given that a universally shared reality is an impossibility, and that the facets of the version of reality we experience change day to day in an interplay with a chaotic set of phenomena of incalculable complexity. So where do we even begin? What is the version of the problem definition I've arrived at? The very process of defining it is so unattainable because the premises, examples, arguments, and conclusions can be directed and questioned to the point of returning to some first principles which are circular by nature. Nevertheless, if I were to try it, I would go something like this. The root of the tension of experience in day-to-day life is the impossibility of satisfying everyone's needs and interests as long as the solutions are sought after separately and not jointly, seeing their commonality. However, given the tremendous inertia of political forces, which are not only constant but accelerating, change of course is highly unlikely before a catastrophe. That is why the only conceivable hope is the prospect of rebuilding the world after it's undergone the consequences of its system. The system in question can and has been described in many ways as a hegemony based on imperialism, colonialism, extractivism, and resulting exploitation. It is profit-driven, uncaring, divisive, dehumanizing, and omnipresent. The ways in which to deal with such a galactic enemy range from broadening our understanding of it to dismantling it from direct acts of concentrated violence, the infrastructure, and the people upholding it. The first approach is an infinite pursuit because of all our constraints of biology, resources, and cognition. The second approach overestimates the ability of people to cooperate to such a high level to apply sustained pressure to the key points of weakness. Without a durable strategy, the best such resistance can hope for is the prolongation of destructive processes, and the worst is the complete stabilization of the already fragile quote-unquote order. The proponents of upheaval might praise such a stabilization as a necessary precognition to anarchic progress that isn't rooted in oppression, but the approach is overly optimistic in the efficacy of large-scale direct democracies and their ability to tackle major global problems, which cannot have fragmentary solutions but must really act in a unified way. It is simultaneously true that the only way to progress is to adjust to our previous mistakes, and that failing leaves us in a better condition for growth than not trying. It is also true that some mistakes are irreparable and that the stakes we face couldn't be higher. So we have to move fast with caution. The constant flow of information overwhelming our minds raises the need to live harmoniously within that environment, integrating the vast amount of stimuli and knowledge requires skill, a process that takes an awful amount of time. The goal of that integration should be to keep a blueprint for navigation that is as interconnected as our neurons. Curating has become an imperative for making sense of the jungle that is the internet, and with every facet of our lives being increasingly digitized, doing the collective sense making means finding ways to survive before it's too late.